Anna. Thank you, Andrew. I'll be very brief because Dr. Weaver has, as he said, laid out the factual case. Let me just share with you, Andrew has shared some of his questions for question period. Right after the British Columbia government said, we find in the joint review process that Enbridge has not provided the evidence that it knows how to deal with the dilbit spill, I put it to the Prime Minister in question period, and this was on June 6th of this year. Will he push through the Enbridge tanker scheme over the objections of British Columbia and the people of British Columbia? And his response was the following, quote, "The project is subject to a joint review panel process. Obviously, we believe in the rule of law, and in adjudicating these things based on scientific and policy concerns, the government will obviously withhold its decision on the matter until we see the results of the panel and its work." Similar to the CBC comments that Andrew showed earlier, the Prime Minister has attempted to convey to Canadians that he doesn't really care much one way or the other what happens until we hear from the National Energy Board Joint Review Project. Now, he used the word obviously twice in a 30-second answer, but nothing was obvious to members of Parliament as these budget matters went through the House. The only reference in Budget 2013 to seeing millions of dollars spent, and it's slightly different. There's two kinds of money being spent here that are uncovered by the documents that have never been public until today. Two kinds of money being spent. Some is the money that's being spent to do Enbridge's homework for them, to do the work that Enbridge didn't do in having the gall to present to a joint review panel what would happen with pipelines and tankers, and never once doing the research on the product they intend to convey. Their information was all about behavior of crude oil in the environment, not dilbit. And this, as Andrew pointed out, and as the British Columbia government, full marks for a very thorough review from the British Columbia government, pointed out, we don't know what happens with dilbit, and dilbit is different. We found that out in the Kalamazoo, Michigan spill. Dilbit is different. So some of this money is going to backfill for Enbridge and do the homework they should have done before they went to the joint review panel. Other money is operational and represents an investment in better weather forecasting for super tanker oil routes that don't exist yet. We're building an infrastructure as though the project is already approved. And that's where I find that the Prime Minister's answer to me in the House of Commons on June 6th, far from anything being obvious, what's clear to me is that the Prime Minister was misleading the House of Commons in saying that the government didn't take any position on the matter until the review process was completed. It's very clear that when you allocate substantial sums of money towards weather forecasting for the navigational routes, specifically referencing at all times oil tankers. I know there, if the project were approved, I'd have no problem whatsoever. In fact, it would be imperative that we put infrastructure into better weather forecasting. But to build the infrastructure for super tanker routes so that there's better weather forecasting on routes that are currently not used by tankers represents jumping the gun and presuming that the approval of this project is a mere formality and taxpayers' money better be spent soon to be ready for weather forecasting. Just so you know what was in Budget 2013, you can find on page 183 a reference to funding to improve and revise the languages, $248 million over 5 years on a cash basis to Environment Canada to revitalize Canada's weather services. This information is vital to protecting the health, safety, security, and economic well-being of individuals and communities. It includes new investments in federal infrastructure, such as radars, surface weather, and climate monitoring stations. To be clear, not all of the $248 million is destined for the routes that you've just seen on the PowerPoint that Andrew displayed, but a substantial portion of federal money advertised to MPs and the public as revitalizing Canada's weather services is clearly being put forward in advance of the project review being completed on the presumption that it's going ahead, and we better know how to forecast weather and storms coming up on the Hecate Strait, because it's one of the most hazardous bodies of water on the planet, according to Environment Canada, and they want to be able to provide weather forecasts specifically in these documents for oil tankers. Now, I personally quite shocked by the extent of spending when we see science being cut in so many other areas. We don't have to look far to see the cuts to science. I mean, it's only a couple $100,000 for the center of the universe. There's a limited amount of money required to keep the experimental lakes area going in in Western Ontario and Eastern Manitoba. There's money that we need for the Polar Environmental Arctic Research Lab in Eureka. The Marine Contaminants Program, 80 scientists across Canada, all laid off. It's not as if it doesn't matter to know what's happening to contaminants in the environment, but apparently the Harper administration isn't interested in that kind of science. If you go back to Budget 2012, you find out very clearly what kind of science Mr. Harper is interested in. Budget 2012 said government spending in science would have to be, quote unquote, business-led and industry relevant, unquote. We're losing core scientific capacity across Canada, and what do we find? We find that without telling us what they're doing, nothing obvious about it, Mr. Harper, federal money, taxpayers' dollars are being spent both to do Enbridge's homework for them and to presume we're going to need to have better weather forecasting along tanker routes that are not yet approved.